Genesis 41, chapter 41, verse 1. I don't think that I'm going to try to read. We're going to cover verses 1 through 45. I don't think I'm going to try to read all these. We'll be here longer than what you probably want to be. You remember those of you who were under John Hall's teaching, I say his name a lot and refer to him. He had a lot that I learned, and one of the statements I learned as a youngster from him, he said, if a preacher can't tell a fellow how to get to heaven in 30 minutes, he don't know the way himself. So I try to limit 30 minutes. Sometimes they go beyond, but sometimes I'll be 20, 25 minutes. So I just try to put out the message God wants me to share, and then it ends. But I do try to keep in a time limit. Somebody else said one time that the mind will only absorb as much as a posterior will endure. And that's a pretty good statement right there, right? We get antsy sitting around, even me. I hate sitting in long meetings. I just can't do it. I'm better than I used to be. But as a youngster, man, the attention span of children, here's a good one if I can remember all this. For a 4 and a 5-year-old, the attention span is like 25 seconds, right? And when they get to be first through third grade, then you get up to about 2 to 3 minutes, and then when you get to those higher elementary ages, it's not going to be but around, I don't remember the exact stuff, but Allison probably remembers all this, but it's only about 10 minutes. So as an elementary teacher, and I taught elementary music, you need to change activities, boy. You better have some activities lined up, right, Allison? You stay on one thing, that's for a minute, them little kindergarten minds, you lost them. You trying to teach them 1 + 1, and they're thinking about them Easter eggs they're going to pick up, or something else is on their mind. You lost them. So I try to keep it where, and I'm not the best at it, but I try to keep the message where it's interesting and within a reasonable time limit. All right, let's just start right here, and let me just review with you in case you've missed it. And by the way, if you I sent a link to the first message out of this series to a friend of mine going through some problems. I thought, I'm going to tell him the same thing that's right here in his word, so if I can hook him into that, he can go back. So I'd encourage you, go back to the website, hillsidechurch.net, and see those messages and share them with friends if you think they can benefit from them. Okay, but if you missed the first two, you missed some very good points that I would urge you to review and maybe write some of those down. Let's look here at this story of Joseph, as we continue looking at his life in the midst of his problems. And let's review now his problems. He had family problems. Verse 37, his brothers hated him. They were jealous of him. And we saw later, it even says they wanted him dead. Some of them ready to kill him. Okay, so he had family problems. And then he had a problem when they threw him in this pit. He was in a place he could not get out of. I'm sure he didn't want to stay in that pit too long. It might have been good if he was hiding from Indians or something, or for somebody trying to get you. But, pit, who wants to stay in a doggone hole in the ground, when you can't get out? So they got him out and they sold him as merchandise. So there's another problem. And then the ones that bought him, the Midianites, went into Egypt, carried him off to Egypt, sold him as a slave. Well, after being enslaved to Potiphar, who was one of the chief officials for, can't remember his position, but he was officer of Pharaoh, Egyptian officer Pharaoh, captain of the bodyguard. I flipped back and cheated, chapter 39, verse 1. So he was a high up guy, but Joseph became Potiphar's slave, see? So he's a slave for several years. And then he gets accused for something he didn't do. And then he gets put in prison, so now he's got another problem. Just one problem after another. He's probably thinking, when does this go in? You ever thought that? I'll be glad when I get out of this. I'm ready to move on, That's like when you're playing baseball. Anybody ever play baseball or softball? You got some little spots out there that you run to, and one of them's called home plate. But first, you got to run and tag first base. And before you can't go from first straight to home. You got to go around the bases, second base, and you got to tag each one or you can be out. And the point you thought you made can just get deleted or erased, and you hadn't done anything, made out, right? So in life there things we got to go through, and that's what's happening with Joseph right here. He's got problem after problem, but God is in control of it all. Got to learn. God is in control of it all. Say that with me. God is in control of it all. And let's remember, just like with Job, nothing can come your way, no matter how bad, how negative, unless it has the permission of God. It's got to go through His hands first. Even if Satan himself brings it, it ain't going to happen without God's permission. And if God allows it, guess what? He's got a reason for it. You may never see that reason. I was listening to Dr. Tony Evans. He's a black preacher, one of my favorite to listen to. He teaches the Word. He's right in the Word. And he made a point recently when I was listening to him about Job. He said, you know, it begins the book of Job with a conversation in heaven with Satan and the Lord about Job. And anyway, Job, there's no evidence that Job ever knew anything about that conversation. He didn't have a clue what was going on when he lost all of his possessions, when he lost his family. Based on Scripture, he had no knowledge of why God was doing all this. But the response, he had the right response. You and I, when problems come, have the right response. All right, that's a review, and I'm going to skip on right now to a lot of things I could say, but I'm going to skip 3 pages of notes. Y'all mind if I do that? Let's go right on to Genesis 41. We see the king now. We get into the story of Pharaoh. We left off last week, Joseph still in prison, and we saw that story. And now it just flips to a different scene here in chapter 41. Look at verse 1 of chapter 41. Now it happened at the end of 2 full years. How many years? 2 full years, not months, not days. At the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh, the king, had a dream. And behold, he was standing by the Nile, which is a river. And lo, from the Nile River there came up 7 cows, sleek and fat. They grazed in the marsh. That means sleek and fat. They were good-looking, healthy stock. Verse 3, then, behold, 7 other cows came up after them from the Nile, ugly. You ever seen an ugly cow? And gaunt. And they stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile River. Okay? So you got it. You got a picture of 7 fat, healthy cows, good looking, you know, that you'd like to put in your freezer. Then you got these other raunchy looking cows, probably bony as they could be, and just look poor and need a good worm treatment and need a lot of other things, and you know, they just don't look good. What happens, verse 4, these ugly, skinny old cows come up to the healthy cows, and they eat them up. Verse 3 is where that actually happens. They came up, and they eat them up. Am I reading that right? I'm trying not to read so much, I'm getting behind, but trying to save time. Okay, so they ate them up. And verse 5 it says that he fell asleep and dreamed a second time. And behold, this time, not about cows, but he's dreaming about ears of grain. I'm guessing this is corn on a stalk. He dreamed and he saw 7 ears of corn come up on a single stalk, plump, good, big old ears. Then behold, 7 ears, thin and scorched, all withered. Didn't look like something you want to pull off and carry home and clean up and eat. They came up after those. And then verse 7, the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump and full ears. Just swallowed them up. Then Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. Now, that's some crazy dream. Anybody ever had a crazy dream before? I've had some crazy ones like, where in the world did that come from? Well, in the morning when he woke up, verse 8, his spirit was troubled. Now, these dreams rattled his cage. You know, these shook him. He was troubled. So he said, there's got to be a meaning to this. So he calls for all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men, and he told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Verse 9. Then the chief cupbearer, remember him, that's the last story, spoke to Pharaoh saying, I would mention today of my own offenses. Look, King, I want to bring up something out of the past. Basically what he's saying. Verse 10, Pharaoh, you remember when you was mad at us, me and the chief baker, and you put us in that prison, down in that prison? He said, we were dreaming when we were down in there, and verse 11, and each one of us had a dream and an interpretation, and we couldn't interpret it either. But there was a Hebrew youth, verse 12, talking about Joseph. He was there. He was a servant of the captain of the bodyguard, and we told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us. And guess what? They turned out just like he said, because he told us that you were going to kill the chief baker, but I was going to be put back in my position. Now here I am. So he knows how to do it. So what happened? Pharaoh sent, verse 14, he called for Joseph. Okay, let's bring him up here. Interesting, it says in the middle of verse 14 that when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came to Pharaoh. He didn't have any decent clothes to wear, so they fixed him up. He's going before the king. You can't just go in there filthy and all, raggedy clothes and all, and these, even if it was a brand new blue jeans with all them holes up and down the legs, you probably couldn't have wore that in front of the king. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, verse 15, but no one can interpret it. And I have heard it said to you that you hear a dream and you can interpret it. Look what he says. 16, Joseph said, it's not in me. God will give Pharaoh a complete, truthful answer. He'll tell you what's going on, but not me. If I get it from God. So Pharaoh spoke to Joseph he said, in my dream, behold, I was standing on the bank of the Nile, and behold, 7 healthy cows came up. And then he says, 7 unhealthy looking cows came up in verse 19. And in verse 20, the lean and ugly cows ate up the first 7 cows. He said, yet, when they ate them up, you couldn't even tell they'd eat anything. They still looked the same size. You would think, it's like when you see a movie or video of a big snake swallowing a panther or a deer, you sit in their belly. Well, these cows ate these other cows, and you couldn't even tell they had anything to eat. Verse 22, also in my dream, behold, 7 ears full and good came up on a single stalk, and lo, 7 ears withered, thin, and scorched by the east also came up after them, and the thin, scorched ears ate up the good, healthy, good-looking ears. And I told it to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, remember now, he's got a spiritual gift. He's able to, once he hears a dream, he can tell now let me just point out right here. I don't believe that God has an interpretation, a meaning for every dream for us to learn from. I believe there are dreams that he gives us that he wants us to learn from, and those we'll just inside know they're different. Now with me, I know that he's given me 2 or 3 dreams in my lifetime that I know he was showing me something. Okay, some of you may be the same way. But some dreams we're just going to dream. If you go to bed, you're thinking about chocolate, or you're thinking about, whatever. You could be dreaming about, man, I landed in this big chocolate factory and then it's just a dream, and then, boy, I just ate till I was sick. And you wake up, something like that. I don't believe God has meanings for that kind of stuff, but there are times when God gives dreams, I believe, and there's meanings to those dreams, and this was one of those cases. Verse 25, Joseph said to Pharaoh, Pharaoh's dreams are one and the same. God has told Pharaoh what he's about to do. Pharaoh, your dreams has got some meaning behind them. Let me tell you what it is. He says in verse 26, them 7 good cows you saw are 7 good years. And them old, lean, ugly, unhealthy looking cows, them 7 are 7 bad years. And the same with the ears of corn, whatever. And he says, let's skip on down to 28. It is as I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. Behold, 7 years of great abundance are coming in all the land of Egypt. And after them, verse 30, 7 years of famine will come, and all the abundance will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will ravage the land. So the abundance will be unknown in the land because of that subsequent famine, for it will be very severe. Now, as for the repeating of the dream to Pharaoh twice, one dream about cows and the similar dream, only this time it's corn, it means the matter is determined by God, and God will bring it about quickly. And he gives some advice. Now let Pharaoh look for a man discerning and wise and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh take action to appoint overseers in charge of the land, and let him exact a fifth of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 years. Fifth, that's 20%, right? Let him exact 20% of the abundance. Verse 35, then let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming and store it up. Store it up. Store the grain up for food in the cities under Pharaoh's authority, and let them guard it. Let the food become a reserve for the land, for the 7 years of famine. See with the picture here? Man, you got some good years coming up, but you better store up, because otherwise everybody's going to starve to death. You're going to have a problem on your hand. You're going to even be hungry yourself. You better store some up, and you better start making everybody else store up and let them give you, they give you 20%, and you set it aside so when the bad time comes, we're going to be all right. We can make it. Verse 37, now the proposal seemed good to Pharaoh and all his servants. Then Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this in whom is a divine spirit? So Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has informed you of all this, there is no one so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and according to your command, all my people shall do homage. Only in the throne I will be greater than you. Wow. Whew, he's getting a big promotion. Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Wow. Then Pharaoh took off his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen. Man, he gave him the best suit, brand new, fixed him up, put a gold necklace around his neck, had him ride in his limousine. Verse 43. Had him ride in his second chariot, and they proclaimed before him, bow the knee, and set him over all the land of Egypt. Wow. He was a prisoner. And now folks having to bow before him. He's riding in a big fancy limousine. He's got a suit of clothes on and a big gold piece around his neck that most folks never been able to afford. And he's got the king's signet ring on his hand. That means any decision that's made, he dips it in ink. He puts that signet ring, stamps it basically, and that's the king's authority right there. That means, man, this is the king's message. You better take and do what this piece of paper says, because it's got the king's signet ring stamp on it. Joseph had that authority. He was now in charge of everything, except he was not in charge of Pharaoh. 44, moreover, Pharaoh said to him, though I am Pharaoh, yet without your permission, no one shall even raise his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh gave him some benefits in addition to that. Well, first of all, he gave him a new name. Joseph, they call him Zaphenath-Paneah. And I looked that up, and there's kind of some different thoughts on that. But the revealer of secrets, basically. So he was able to interpret this dream, or these dreams, and so Pharaoh gave him a new name that, man, this guy can interpret. You know, that's basically what that name meant. And he also gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. Now, this was a false god priest, Potipharah, and his daughter must have been a prize to look at in the sight of men, because Pharaoh just took her. It wasn't even his daughter. He gave him somebody else's daughter. But he got a new wife. And she became his wife, and Joseph went forth over the land of Egypt. End of story. Now you want to hear the rest? Well, there's some good stuff in here. I won't have time to cover it all. But listen, in one day, he went from the prison to a palace. In one day. That was something else. What a coincidence, some would say. What a coincidence, man. It's a good thing he had met that chief cupbearer. What a coincidence. Look back with me, chapter 39, I think it was. I done closed my Bible, I got to open it back up. Chapter 41. Joseph in prison. Cupbearer's out of prison. Chief baker dead. Cupbearer back before Pharaoh. Pharaoh having dreams. Verse 41. Now it happened. It just happened. What was it, coincidences? Yeah, it happened. But who controlled all that? God did. At the end of, it says, right after that, now it happened at the end of how many full years? 2. It didn't say 2 full months. It didn't say 2 full days. It happened at the end of 2 full years. God decided this was when it was going to happen. God was in control of it. How long was Joseph in prison? Well, if you look back at chapter 37, when all this chain of events, this chain of problems happened, he was 17 years old. And we learn further in this chapter that we didn't read it all. He was 30 years old when he finally stood before Pharaoh. What's 30 minus 17? 13. 13 years he was enslaved or in prison. 13 years. God could have got him out after day 1 if he wanted to. So what was going on? He had problems and there was delayed deliverance. But it was for a reason. God knew all along he wanted Joseph to be in charge of Egypt. That was the plan from way back, even when this 13-year period started. I don't know that Joseph, I think he had an idea because he had those visions early on we read about with his brothers. He said, one day y'all going to bow down. I had these dreams and it shows y'all bowing down, to me. Anyway, so that probably stayed in the back of his mind, but I don't know that he knew the whole thing. But God knew he's not ready yet to be a ruler over a country. I've got to show him, I've got to teach him some things. He didn't have the knowledge. He didn't have the wisdom. He didn't have the conditioning. He didn't have the mental strength it took. He didn't have the spiritual strength it took. But so for 13 years, God put him through a school to train him and get him ready. Some people, all they would see is problem. And they would just shut down and no family life, no work, just be depressed. And listen, if there's a delay, it's probably because God is up to something. He's trying to get you ready, and the more you put off serving him and responding right, the longer the delay may be. Now, this training was not formal training. He didn't send him off to some college somewhere to get a degree in business. He didn't send him off to some college somewhere to get a master's in political science. He didn't send him off for formal education to sit in the classroom or read textbooks, but he put him in on-the-job training, OJT. He put him in a place where God confronted him with controlled circumstances, we would call problems, but controlled circumstances for required learning that God knew needed to take place. And God knew just exactly what kind of circumstances it would take. And God knew that just college wasn't going to take care of it. And guess what? When God did it this way, he didn't have to pay a dime. It was all free. It was all free. God knows exactly the correct circumstances that you and I need for us to learn the things he wanted us to learn. Let me just give you an example here, what I'm talking about. When I was in college, there was a girl named April. I won't call her last name because this day of technology, videos get out. She made them on me telling her German last name. But we were in a group Bible study, and we'd have shared time. People share what's going on in their lives. And she just, out of the blue one evening at one of these sessions, she says, you know, I'm not going to pray for patience anymore because I prayed for patience, and God paired me up with one of the most difficult people I could have ever been paired up with in a job. I had to work side by side with a difficult person, and God taught me patience that I had prayed for. I'm not praying for patience anymore. These are to pray for forgiveness, right? So God put circumstances there to teach her patience. There are certain things you and I just cannot learn, or maybe we can learn quicker on the job training with God-controlled circumstances. That's what he was doing with Joseph for 13 years. Now, if you look at it from one perspective, oh, poor Joseph. He got thrown into a pit. Poor Joseph. He was just an old sheep herder, you know, with his brothers and went out to check on them. He got thrown into a pit, and then they sold him. Poor Joseph. He got sold as a slave. He was basically kidnapped. Poor old Joseph. He just having problem after problem. And then his Potiphar's wife lies about him. He gets thrown into prison. Poor old Joseph. He just got problems after problems. And if you look at it that way, yeah, in the wisdom of the world, but in the wisdom of God, God made him first a manager of sheep. And then he got a promotion. He became a manager over an estate. Then he got another promotion. And then he became manager over an entire prison system. See? And while there, he learned to speak the Egyptian language. While there, he learned the political system. I guarantee you Potiphar knew all about and probably spoke freely about, well, this is how this worked. Joseph might even ask him questions. Well, who handles these problems over here in this part of the country? How does produce travel from here to here? He was learning, had on-the-job training in his managerial training. If a person ever wants to be a leader of a school system, even the superintendent, isn't it probably wiser that they first become a teacher? And then, before they just jump from teacher straight to superintendent, isn't it just probably wiser in most cases that they get some training and become an administrator next of that school system and gradually go step by step? Is this not what God was doing with Joseph? He became a manager of sheep. He became manager of an estate, a manager of a prison, and now he's running a whole country. And his training didn't cost him anything. He didn't have to pay out one dime. God funded the whole thing. Isn't that one way of looking at it? We call that truth. Truth. What's truth about what you go through? What's the truth about your problem? What are you doing in your situation if you've got a problem? Are you belly aching and whining and complaining? Or are you looking and saying, God, what are you up to? God, is there something more you have for me? And if there is, who in their right mind would want to miss out? God might be having you here for a little bit, but he may be wanting to bring you way up over here for something with responsibility, more clout, more money. I don't know. Money isn't everything, right? The key is being in his will. Joseph was in God's will in this training time. Before he received these promotions and during, he stayed in God's will. In your problems, you may not have immediate deliverance, but if you'll look to God, I'll guarantee you, he's got control of your circumstances, and he can change your circumstances just that fast. Or if he wants to delay them, but if he's got a reason for them, you may take a little longer in getting out of what you're not enjoying. I've given this illustration before. It's been a while. And when I was growing up, we had this white horse Daddy bought for us. I named him Silver. I thought of the Lone Ranger and that big white horse. That horse could run. I never got outrun. He was crazy as a run-over dog, but he was fast. I think he was actually schizophrenic. You could be riding down the road. I mean, he'd see boogers. I remember riding down the road, that dirt road, from Blunt Road to crossing the Blunt and Brushy Pine Road, and I'd be going down it. And I can't count the times. I'm just riding along relaxed. And all of a sudden, that horse, he just saw something, I guess, that wasn't there. Maybe he saw something I didn't see. I don't know. But it scared him. He'd jump ditches and be going through trees. And I remember getting knocked slam out of the saddle and holding on the reins, just getting scratched up. And he was crazy, you know. And I don't know what he was seeing. But he was fast. But I'd like to ride him still. You know, that was a challenge. I remember I'd usually pick me out a spot in my mind. I'd saddle him up, get him going. And I just have I'm going to ride down toward the Spanish Trail. I'll turn around and come back. He was so slow walking away from the barn. But habitually, when we got back, I always brush him down and feed him some fresh corn or some horse feed, something. He'd get rewarded and have a good meal. Well, he got accustomed to that, I guess, because as I would go away from the barn, he's walking slow. It'd take all I could do to get him to walk fast. Now, the old bulldog could come up walking beside us and pass us. He couldn't stand that dog walking faster than him. He'd speed up. He couldn't stand that dog getting ahead of him. He was crazy. See, I told you. But now, coming back, once I reached my destination and started coming back, I had to almost keep him from running. Why? He wanted to get back. He wanted that feed. He wanted that meal, that good food. That's got to be all that it was. But I remember on one occasion, it had rained and I was out in the pasture and there was these puddles of water. And I thought, I'm just going to run with him, get him galloping and make him jump these puddles. So I was enjoying that. I was enjoying galloping and then flying through the air on a horse, you know. And that was just a thrill for me as a teenager. Well, one day I tried that, and he'd want to just put on brakes and stop when he got to the water. He just wasn't going to do it. I said, you crazy horse, we're going to back up and we're going to come do it again. And I would back up or go right around and make a circle and come back, and I'd kick him in the sides again and get him going, and he'd put on brakes and stop right there at the water. Put his head down and just stop. And I'm kicking, trying to get him to go. Well, it's too late. You got to have speed to jump a puddle. Have to go back and start over again. After 2 or 3 times, I thought to myself, and I said, you crazy horse. I know all you got in your mind is you want to go back to the barn and eat food. And if you could only understand, all I want you to jump is one more time and you could get there. It was adversity for him. I couldn't speak his language. I couldn't tell him in a way that he could understand. And isn't that just like us? We want to get from first base right on to home plate. We just want to make it to home. We want to get this over with, but you got to run them bases. And I don't know that sometimes God may be speaking to us and trying to explain things to us, and we, just like a horse that I was trying to talk to and just not understanding and getting it. Whatever God's got going on, He's got a reason. He's got a reason. You need to look to Him and be patient. You respond, look to Him, or otherwise you may delay the deliverance. Let's stand together in prayer.